Free speech on trial. The U.S. Supreme Court will soon decide two major big tech lawsuits that could determine what is and is not allowed for posting on social media. Last week, the court heard arguments in two cases, Gonzalez versus Google and Twitter versus Omne. The Google case concerns protections allowed under a federal law known as Section 230. The Twitter case involves liability under the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act. And here to set us straight is Young Voices commentator James Chernowski. James, it's good to talk with you again. So first, explain the Gonzalez case and what it may mean for our viewers.
Thanks for having me. Basically, when we're looking at Gonzalez versus Google, the question that's being presented is whether or not these platforms can be found liable for recommending content to users. So in this case, what had happened was that there was a terrorist attack that happened and that ISIS people were recruited on YouTube videos had popped up in the recommendation section. So that's the question that's being presented, is whether or not Google should be held liable for having that on their website.
Well, is Section 230, the law that's quoted here that limits big tech liability, is that a good law? Should it be revised? Because it seems to me if this goes against Google, we may see more social media censorship and limits on speech.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the problem here is that a wrong decision for Google is a wrong decision for the internet writ large. The internet is founded underneath a series of recommendations. So if we go and hold platforms liable for having these recommendations, it means that there's more manual review, more censorship, less content getting to users.
What else could happen as a result of this? I mean, broad ramifications.
Yeah, I think that basically it makes it harder for you to discover new voices online. I think that if platforms are in a position where they can't go and recommend content to users, it means that it's harder for us to go and discover networks like yours, to discover networks that have emerged in the internet era. That's a bad impact for everybody.
And tell us about the Twitter case, the argument that the radicalization of social media followers falls under terms of the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act.
Yes, when we're looking at Lovey Twitter, the question is whether or not Twitter can be held culpable for materially and significantly contributing to an act of terrorism underneath the Anti-Terrorism Act. That's not a great question to be looking at insofar as that these platforms are not necessarily aware as to what's going on, and it wouldn't make sense to hold them liable for that.
Well, what do you think is going to happen here? I mean, it seems that one seems like a reach to me, about accusing Twitter of being a terrorist or aiding and abetting terrorism. What do you think is going to happen in these cases? The courts seem to be a little perplexed.
Yeah, I think everybody's a little perplexed as to what's going to happen here, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think that everybody is confused as to what's going to happen because the online ecosystem is just so much more different than what we've traditionally been used to in an offline world. I think Justice Kavanaugh kind of set it up great in the Gonzalez v. Google case insofar as that he said that if we were to expose platforms to liability here, it would basically defeat the purpose of the law itself. So I think that that's something that we have to be cognizant of as we're looking forward, and we'll certainly keep everybody updated as we learn more.
James, it seems this is all new ground here. Which speech should be allowed, which shouldn't. Obviously, we don't want to see terrorist groups, hate groups, spreading their ideology, getting new converts, recruits. But then who decides what is a hate group? After all, I know the Southern Poverty Law Center calls the Family Research Council a hate group. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and it's one that we have to think very carefully about because one man's terrorist could be another man's freedom fighter. And I think that when we're looking at the war on terror, they only have to get it right one time, whereas these companies have to get it right 100% of the time. And these companies do, mind you, take a lot of proactive efforts in order to combat the rise of ideological radicalization on their platforms.
Well, we've seen a big change at Twitter under Elon Musk. I mean, there's a lot of speech that wasn't allowed before. We've seen that exposed. Where do you think that's headed?
I think that Elon Musk is doing the best he can to reshape the platform in his vision. I think that he's taken a lot of steps that are in the positive direction, and I think that we should be very excited about what the future holds for this company.
Well, are we going to see, in your opinion, more censorship, less free speech? What's going to happen here across these platforms in the future?
If these platforms are held liable underneath either of these cases, I think you'll see more censorship in general. I think Elon Musk is trying to pave the way for an ecosystem on the internet that will result in less censorship overall, but that's going to take time and dedication to make it work. So I think that we need to have patience with these platforms to adjust in changing circumstances, and we can only hope that the Supreme Court sees it that way too.
Okay, we'll see how all this plays out, how it comes down with the court. We'll be talking with you again when the court makes their decision. Young Voices commentator James Chernowski, thanks for setting us straight today.
Thanks for having me.